On today's World Insight, Armenia and Azerbaijan clash over Nagorno-Karabakh. How do clashes in this disputed mountainous area draw in regional powers? And we speak to the director of the UNESCO Beijing Office. She makes the case for cultural protection even as the pandemic has closed many museums and cultural sites.
Creative artists, they have had a hit in their livelihood.
Here's our host, Xian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight, coming to you live on CGTN from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. We begin today's program with the ongoing war on the edge of Europe. Armenia and Azerbaijan are accusing each other of attacking large cities in violation of a new ceasefire. The fighting erupted just hours after Russia brokered a deal. The OSCE Minsk Group co-chair nations, France, Russia, and the United States, are expected to hold negotiations on Nagorno-Karabakh region again on Monday in Moscow. The leaders have condemned the escalation of violence and urged both sides to observe the ceasefire. Renewed clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan erupted on September 27th, with intense battles raging in the disputed region of Nagorno-Karabakh. The area has experienced numerous skirmishes over the past 2 decades. Azerbaijan and Armenia have imposed the martial law and launched mobilization efforts. Both parties to the conflict have reported casualties, among them civilians. On the conflict, we have in Tbilisi, George Mishedlevich, who is an associate professor at the European University. In Moscow, we are joined by Dmitry Barbish, a political analyst from Sputnik International News Agency. In Beijing, Zhou Rong, senior analyst from the Chongyang Institute for Financial Studies at Renmin University. Gentlemen, welcome to the program. I want to correct the pronunciation, first of all, of our first guest. I hope I could pronounce your family name right. First time talking to you, though. Mishedlishvili. Mr. Mishedlishvili, what a pleasure to have you on the program. Help us to understand the latest assessment of the situation. The ceasefire obviously did not work.
Good evening. Thank you for the invitation. As far as the situation is concerned, the stakes seem to be too high, particularly for Azerbaijan and for Armenia as well. So that's why, unfortunately, ceasefire do not hold. Civilians continue to be killed in very large quantities. This current flare-up, it's already a full-fledged war. It's no longer a flare-up on the conflagration that was occurring for 4 years ago for 4 days, or even in early July for a few days. So now the casualties, the fatalities count is in the hundreds. Well, it seems to be the positions are very entrenched. Even if you see the social media and the pronouncements of the officials, of the officers in Armenia, Azerbaijan, the language is so inflammatory. The attitude towards the other party is so dehumanizing. It's so, well, like almost like a racist and like inconceivable and unacceptable that one can understand that the hatred of the communities, the hatred of this even nations, like with very few exceptions, is so intense that well, now one can say in retrospect that the ceasefire was almost doomed, but it seems like it almost was. That's very unfortunate, and looks like there should be the outcome that would be, I would say, sellable to the population.
Okay.
Again, this like war rhetoric in Azerbaijan was so intense that now maybe kind of even this regaining some ground, regaining few regions might not be enough for the population. All the more since the bombing of Ganja, kind of the second largest city, as the other casualties, they increase the kind of this degree, the boiling point. And
let's also have let's also have the other two panelists to talk a little bit on their opinions, sir. If I could share a fair share of time to the other two. Mr. Barbish, you are joining us in Moscow. Russia has been a party that has been trying to bring both sides together. Of course, historically speaking, the conflict is very complicated. So, help us to understand what's the result between Russia and Turkish foreign ministers.
Well, I mean, we don't know all the details of the talks and, in general, of connections between Russia and Turkey. But, of course, Turkey, I think, made a mistake when it 100% put itself on the side of Azerbaijan, when, unfortunately, this violence flared up again after 26 years of relative peace in that region. Let me remind you that the war actually started back in the times of the Soviet Union in 1988, when Nagorno-Karabakh, which is officially an Azerbaijani region, but which had and has an Armenian population, basically asked to be joined with Armenia. That was still in the framework of the Soviet Union. That was not done, of course, but unfortunately Armenia and Azerbaijan became enemies. And in 1994, the war ended basically with the victory of Armenia. Not only was the so-called Nagorno-Karabakh Republic not recognized by anyone, not only was it pronounced and kept, but also Armenians control 7 districts of Azerbaijani territory next to Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenians say that this is security zone necessary for the protection of Nagorno-Karabakh. So in this situation, I think the country that would be most impartial will be the winner, because in this situation, if you show any sympathy towards one of the sides, you cannot be a peacemaker. You cannot broker a deal between these two really hostile parties, as our previous speaker rightly noted.
Well,
so
Mr. Barbish,
Russia, unlike Turkey, did not take any sides in this conflict.
Many believe, Mr. Barbish, that Russia is pretty much on the side of Armenia. At least that's the commonly believed concept. What do you make of that, if you're talking about impartial?
Well, if you look at the statements from the Russian government and you find me a single sentence that would say that Russia is somehow criticizing only Azerbaijan, that Russia is somehow on the side of Armenia, I will give you $1,000. Well, the media is a different thing, because the Armenian community everywhere, including Russia, is much more influential than the Azerbaijani community, with the exception of Turkey, of course. And the Armenian community is very active in the media. We have very diversified media, so yes, Armenians and their allies are making their case. But Azerbaijanis are making their case in the Russian media too, but I think you shouldn't so much look at the media, look at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and its statements, look at the official position of Russia and its president. The official position is impartial indeed, and that's why Azerbaijanis agreed to have these talks in Moscow. They would probably prefer to have them in Istanbul or Ankara, but then Armenia would not accept.
Yeah.
So in this situation, Moscow was chosen simply because it seems to be the most impartial at the moment.
Mr. Zhou.
Yes.
You are talking from Beijing. Of course, China is not a party involved, but the reason we have also you in the panel is trying to have someone from outside the region and to look inside into the issue. As both of our panelists earlier explained, this is not a new one. It's not a new conflict. It's a conflict that has been there since the 1980s, and probably since the end of the First World War.
Yes.
It is already becoming very much a region of conflict and disputes. So, Mr. Zhou, what do you make of its re-eruption, shall we say, again, of this conflict? And do you think we have learned at all the lessons from the earliest rounds of conflict, which killed at least 30,000 people from both sides?
Yes, I think, as we all know, Nagorno-Karabakh is a conflicting area which have at least 4 times conflicts for the last 40 years. We all know that 3 important neighbors which can, to a certain degree, influence Azerbaijan and Armenia. We all know that Azerbaijan has a special relationship with Turkey because most of Turkish people does not regard Azerbaijan language as a foreign language. They think they are relative languages. But for Armenia, up till now, Turkey has not established official diplomatic ties with that. Because Armenian people always remember the slaughter of 1915, so-called 1.50 million population, 1.5 million population were slaughtered by Turkey, by Ottoman Empire, but which Turkey did not acknowledge that. For Iran, Iran has a very special relationship with both countries. You know, 1/4 of the Iranian population are Azerbaijan, and Azerbaijan people just believe in Shia. And also for Armenia, Armenia also has a special relationship with Iran because Armenia need some energy supply from Iran. So people regard Armenia is a pro-Western country. I don't trust so. I think the militarily supported by Russia and energy, on the regard of energy supported by Iran. For such country, it cannot be very pro-Western country. Just like Georgia. Georgia is also regarded as a pro-Western country, but I don't think so. Outsiders may influence the situation, but currently, all of the outsiders wanted to have a continuous ceasefire, especially they think should be a permanent ceasefire, but I don't really believe so. I think ceasefire will be, yeah, thank you.
Mr. Delishvili, I'm sure, sir, you've been listening to the other 2 guests. It's an interesting situation, as illustrated by Mr. Zhou, that all of those who are from outside try to put ceasefire to the conflict, and yet the 2 countries are not coming close to a ceasefire at all, given all the complicated history that all of you somewhat illustrated within a short period of time. So what's next? Did we learn anything, or can we learn anything from eventually a result from the last conflict?
Well, whether we learn or not, like the people outside these 2 countries, of course it's the matter of the 2 nations and of the 2 leaderships, actually kind of like to reconcile and come to the agreement. International community and the neighbors could assist, they could engage. One can, of course, argue, and probably not without reason, that currently the engagement is insufficient. Very unfortunately, kind of the statements of France and United States were like largely anemic. Only Joe Biden, which is like so far actually, well, not the president at the moment, and like doesn't hold the official position, like made the statement which showed some understanding, well, vision of the situation of the ground. So these statements of other members of the Minsk group, which are officially mandated to find the reconciliation and to negotiate, to support negotiations, they seem to be very inactive, with the exception of Russia. So Russia took the leadership role again in this particular regard. So in my personal opinion, the lack of the Western engagement is very bad. The very fact that it is not in the United States is very much distracted with the election, with the actually kind of with the COVID, obviously kind of very serious and painful issues and fundamental issues, but and also this America First formula. So the United States has been largely disengaged from the South Caucasus, and for me personally, as a citizen of Georgia, this is a worrying development, and therefore they cannot provide incentives, sufficient incentives, like to the countries, like to reconcile and to create a region. So I would argue, well, and probably kind of the next speaker might disagree and like add something to this region. So Russia, in my opinion, is not very much interested in having this region united, because that Karabakh conflict seems to be the biggest hurdle in turning the South Caucasus area into the fully fledged region. There are so many benefits from having this functioning region of the countries, because of its potential, because of the geographic position, because of the resources, like mostly carbohydrate resources of the Caspian Sea, but also others, that, well, the fact that the international community is disengaged, of course, is like negative. More engagement is necessary, but again, there should be the interest, there should be benefits. Unfortunately, today the West doesn't see benefits of being more engaged in this region.
Mr. Barbish, what about that question posed by the earlier speaker? Hypothetical questions, of course, but what do you make of his theories?
Well, first I would say that not all history of that region and not all history of relations between Armenians and Azerbaijanis is all black. There was a long period, 70 years, when there were hundreds of thousands of Armenians living in the Azerbaijani capital, Baku, in the 20th century, and they had excellent relationship with the locals. And Baku was called the Paris of the Caspian because it had all communities in it: Russians, Azerbaijanis, Armenians, Jews, and they all lived in peace, and that continued for many years. Even here in Moscow, Azerbaijanis and Armenians are friends. You know, they often do business together, especially the older generation. The younger generation has been subjected more to nationalist propaganda, both in Armenia and in Azerbaijan. But I noticed that a lot of young people do not believe this propaganda. They believe they become free of it when they leave the region. So it's a conflict, but it is mostly right now limited to the antagonism, I would say almost tribal antagonism, because Nagorno-Karabakh is basically economically not a very valuable region. There is no oil there, there is no gas. It's a mountainous, very beautiful, but economically absolutely useless area. On the role of the West, unfortunately, in the last, I would say, 30 years, the role of the West was mostly negative. I mean, look at Iraq, look at Libya, where civil war continued after the Western intervention. So Transcaucasus, I mean, people there are very well informed about the developments in other countries. So maybe the reason why this time they went to Russia is because they see the experience in Iraq. They see the experience in Libya and also in Syria. Mm-hmm. So, you know, right now I agree with our previous speaker. Mr. Trump is good for nothing. He cannot be a negotiator. But maybe it's not such a bad thing, because if Mr. Biden continues in the same vein as Obama and Hillary Clinton, who managed to antagonize even China, a very peaceful country that tried to stay neutral in all of these conflicts, maybe the West should first reform itself, come to terms with itself, and then it can be a peacemaker. Right now, I think the West is simply unable, unfit to be a peacemaker in other regions, including such a fragile region as Transcaucasus. I think the way forward is to appeal to the nice pages of history, and there were such nice pages in the history of Transcaucasus. Azerbaijan always belonged to Iran. It is a Turkic-speaking country, but it had never been a part of Turkey, of the Ottoman Empire. So bad blood between Turkey and Armenia cannot be automatically attributed to Azerbaijan. And the previous speaker, the Chinese speaker, he rightly described the position of Iran. I think the position of Iran is important to take into account. It refutes the idea that this is a religious conflict, because Iran is also a Muslim country, just like Azerbaijan. But Iran is pretty impartial, almost on the side of Armenia. Why? Because Iran has a substantial Azerbaijani minority, and Iran is afraid of separatism. So Iran is more or less neutral in this situation.
Right. The situations are quite complicated, involving all parties, and everybody has their own concerns. We hope everybody could contribute to the solutions. Before we go, we only have 2 minutes left. Mr. Zhou, any input about the way forward?
Yes. I suppose right now all the outsiders right now support the ceasefire, even including Turkey. So I think the ceasefire may continue for some time. Hopefully, the peace may stay long.
I'm not sure the ceasefire could stay for a long time because the ceasefire has already been broken so far. George, before we go, any quick thoughts?
Oh, well, it's really difficult to provide a quick thought, but, well, there are people in both countries, and again, the speaker from Russia mentioned Russia. Well, there is an example of very peaceful coexistence of Armenian and Azerbaijanis, like next door, well, just like a few hundred meters from where I live. Like in Georgia, in Tbilisi, there are significant communities. About 6% of the population of Georgia are ethnic Armenian, 6% ethnic Azerbaijani. They live very, even current conflict, even current very toxic and vitriolic conflict and like social media war hasn't affected them so far, which is a good sign that there is an example of the two communities cooperating like peacefully. Well, they should go back and see the chapters of their history when Armenians and Azerbaijanis, modern Azerbaijanis or Caucasian Muslims at the time, coexisted peacefully in Nagorno-Karabakh, in that area. So the experience is significant. So they should go back to that good roots of their coexistence.
I hope that will be the case, but things are obviously more complicated than our hope. Yeah. Thank you so much, George Mishedilishvili, Dmitry Barbish in Moscow earlier joining us, and Zhou Rong in Beijing. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
You're watching World Insight, still to come on our program. We speak to the director of UNESCO Beijing Office. She explains how we can cherish and protect cultural heritage while socially distant. Stay tuned. Welcome back. You're still watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. During this year's UN General Assembly, world leaders spoke their minds at virtual meetings on the COVID-19 pandemic. Many call for renewed efforts to meet the UN 2030 Sustainable Development Goals, the road to prosperity for humankind, many believe. They recognize that ending poverty must go hand in hand with sustained economic growth and cover basic needs such as education, health, and jobs. UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, is in the front line of the cause. Earlier, I talked to Dr. Maria-Elsa Oliveira, the director of the UNESCO Beijing Office, who's an outspoken guardian of cultural heritage protection. She emphasized the need for international community to talk and to better understand each other. We also discussed the challenges facing education and cultural exchanges amid the pandemic. Take a look. I know you are working very hard in China, but the challenge of COVID-19 is for everyone in the world. So the protection, preservation of cultural heritage sites, museums, public and national parks, extremely challenging right now.
Indeed. You know, it's one of the biggest challenges we have. As a matter of fact, when you think about the pandemic, it has affected 30 million people in terms of health, but in terms of education, at some point 1.5 billion students, and in culture, almost everyone. For all the people who derive their livelihoods or enjoy culture as an element of resilience and so on, they have had, you know, a tremendous hit all the artists, craftspeople, creative artists, they have had a hit in their livelihoods. So it's a big challenge right now. Close to 90% of the museums of the world had to close, and to stop receiving visitors simply because of social distancing and lockdown protocols, to avoid infection. Which means that, the challenges of keeping culture going have never been as hard as they are now. First, we need to think about how to ensure that we can actually reopen these cultural venues safely and restart the festivals, exhibitions, and all the other magnificent ways in which we share our culture in a safe way that does not create potential clusters of transmission, for example. But we also have to think of how culture can continue going during lockdown periods. It's not the case here in China anymore, but it's still the same in many places, including my own home country, Brazil, that we keep, considering how culture can help people, how we can help culture continue to go on, and at a time that it's been so difficult. So what UNESCO has done in that regard, first we held a global meeting of cultural ministers. China was a strong participant and sent a very positive message, highlighting the importance of culture as a means for resilience for people and showing how culture itself is very resilient. It keeps going. But we had to actually move culture mostly online. So we have fantastic events around the world going on. We had this big debate in China. We had the Resiliart debate with people from all different walks of cultural life, with dancers, with musicians, with film, and so on.
Beautifully said. I think recently we've seen some theaters in China reopened and performances being put on stage. The dancers were galloping almost on the stages. Just think about the happiness of being able to dance again in front of the audience they admire. So these are all exciting news. But the underlining more philosophical thinking about how digital world can coexist with the physical world, and what would that mean in terms of challenge, though, of cultural interactions?
China has a marvelous, marvelous troupe of dancers.
Yes.
And one of the most beautiful, capable dance troupe that I've ever seen. And one of the things that they were saying to us is that on top of the difficulties that they have of face masks, they can't really read, instruction and hidden behind a face mask like that. So the challenges are so many. But the thing is, culture is also very adaptive and very flexible, most creative endeavors that humanity has, and they are finding ways of interacting with the public, even if it's through an online screen. And technology is helping quite a lot. For example, museums, many museums, and in China, an incredible number of them have started online tours, with 3D and virtual reality and all the different aspects that allow you to kind of immerse yourself in the beauty that surrounds you through an exhibition, in a museum, and so on. So that's one of the ways, keep culture going using technology to give you the feeling of being there, But the other is actually on various social groups that have cropped up between artists and their publics to actually exchange on a more deeper, profound level than they actually can exchange with an audience that is just watching, When you're dancing for an audience, yes, you feel the energy, but you're not really talking to them. But social media has allowed that kind of two-way interaction to take place as well. So it's not all a loss in that sense.
The other thing I really want to ask you is about the protection of cultural heritage sites. Earlier, there were concerns whether there are enough protections of cultural heritage sites, whether the mindset is right, and whether there's enough knowledge of and determination to research and investigate. But now you see the public awareness of that is ever increasing, almost skyrocketing in a way, encouraging and rallying the government's efforts to work on that area. How do you see this change in a way that's really just taking place over the past few years?
I love this. This is so heartwarming, you know, to see the public cherishing their heritage and jumping in, you know, to do what they can in order to protect it. And it's, you know, it's so beautiful to see that. And I'm very, very pleased that we could be here to see that happen in China. You know, you mentioned the 40 years of the UN in China. UNESCO has been here for 35 years, and the first year was the first year in which China actually had a few heritage sites designated. Now, after 35 years, it has the largest number of heritage sites in the world. And the public recognizes the importance and the value, the outstanding universal value of heritage sites, and is becoming more and more aware of the need to do their part in conservation and to make sure that they are maintained and transmitted properly. But not just heritage sites, traditions and practices as well. There's a renewed interest in young people to learn about their traditions and to seek to actually practice some of those. And of course we are going to do and continue to raising awareness of the public, because an interest in conservation and safeguarding doesn't mean a knowledge of how, you know, and you know, so it's really important that we actually take this incredible motivation, this beautiful willingness to support, and transform it into an informed willingness to support, in order for them to actually, for the general public to actually be able to do that.
I know you've been visiting many of these sites. You've been talking to the community there. You've been interacting with officials. I read a lot of information about your tours, in fact, before coming here. So give me some example, please.
Well, I mean, the public loves their heritage sites. They really do. So when they visit, they touch it. It's not a good thing, you know, so you see what I mean? Yes. You know, when you put your hand on the wall, you know, it's one hand, yeah, but multiply that by 1 million visitors, and you could do some real damage, you know, to some fragile frescoes or, you know, or something like that. So, you know, explaining to the public that, you know, please admire it, but you know, but be aware that your admiration has to be a hands-off one, and you know, you should not be taking a little rock to take home with you as a souvenir, because that little rock maybe have been a part, you know, that fell from a particular place and would need to be put back, you know, and things like that. I mean, of course, it doesn't happen so much here in China, you know. So explaining to the public that your love and admiration should be expressed in a way that that maintains the integrity of the sites, you know, it's very important.
You see, these days, celebrations are taking place around China. I'm sure you're talking to many of them. For example, the Forbidden City and 600 years anniversary. 270 years of the Summer Palace here in Beijing. They're all celebrating in big ways, and they're just trying so hard to find out the roots of culture and how it has been serving as a bridge between China and the rest of the world. How do you see a combination of both searching for the root and searching for inspiration as to how China functioned in history in terms of interacting with the rest of the world at a time, interestingly, of uncertainty when it comes to politics?
You know, heritage sites belong to humanity. So in a way, they are the property, the collective property of all of us. Some of them are special in that they have signs of the exchanges that have taken place over time between different cultures. One of the most beautiful exhibitions I've ever seen in the Palace Museum was of gifts from foreigners that were given to the Emperor of China and that were exhibited alongside some of the beautiful pottery and artifacts that China itself has produced. And you know, it's a fantastic thing because you know, it was a fantastic exhibition because first it was a demonstration of very positive interactions that have taken place in the past, you know, of signs of friendship between cultures, between civilizations, that culture itself materialized, you know. The other thing was to see, you know, how these artifacts, the Chinese artifacts and the foreign artifacts, sometimes were very similar in terms of the techniques used and so on, showing that previous exchanges had taken place. But you see already that over thousands of years there had been exchanges that benefited both sides. And that exchanges benefiting both sides is exactly what we need right now. You know, what they, you know, in China you call mutual benefits, win-win cooperation and so on, because the kinds of challenges we have nowadays, they require that very positive spirit, that willingness to engage in a way that benefits everyone, you know, and having these kinds of signs in heritage sites that belong to humanity gives us, you know, a feeling that what we had before, friendly exchanges that were positive to all sides, we can have again. We have the capacity to hold those.
You come to China at a critical time, shall I put it that way?
Oh, yes, I'm very lucky.
It's also an uncertain time in terms of how China works with the rest of the world and how some of the other key players in the world look at international platforms such as the United Nations. From your perspective, working in cultural exchanges, education, and science fields in China and beyond in your early posts, how do you see our generation, literally speaking, will be able to provide a good answer to history?
Well, we're all trying to find the answer for that. And to me, the answer is essentially that we need to find common ground with all cultures that exist, you know, with respect of diversity, respect for human rights, respect and tolerance towards other cultures and the ways of life. Because that's the only way, you know, from values like that, that we can emerge and, you know, engage in international cooperation. The challenges we face right now are particularly unique because at no time, you know, in history, you know, before, we actually had, you know, literally, you know, life-threatening challenges that are global in nature, like we have right now. You know, the combination of all of those are beyond the capacity of any nation to address. You know, we have climate change, we have the social economic impacts of the pandemic that have left, you know, literally, the ILO has released a report 2 days ago saying that the equivalent of 500 million jobs have been lost. You know, we have a generation of students that have lost 1 year of education.
To say the least.
To say the least. And we have, like we've been discussing, 90% of the cultural venues of the world closed and so on and so forth. So our challenges that go from the environment to geopolitics that have been quite acerbic, you know, to say the least, lately, for the interruptions in trade that we've seen because of disruptions in value chain or because of animosity between countries. All those things are unique because we never had all of those piled up in one generation, in one group of people at the same time. You know, so it's literally, you know, it's it's tearing apart, the fabric of our societies. And we need to find ways in which we communicate better, and that we are able to explain our viewpoints to each other and debate how we can agree, to what is the pathway forward, because, and how we are going to divide the labor, the tasks of moving forward. What is the part that actually touches us, and how can we contribute to such an effort? One of the things that I find fascinating in China is how you have, the central government setting goals, and then, how it's decentralized, in terms of small goals, for different municipalities and, and provinces and so on. What part should you be contributing to this national goal? Well, multilateralism is essentially the same. It's us setting goals together, globally, and then saying, how can we do our part? And we have a set of goals. It's called the Sustainable Development Goals. And we had agreed on those collectively. And of course, nationally, we need to actually pursue, the accomplishment of those goals together, because they are not only contributing to global goals, but they are also bettering the lives in our own nations and communities. So this is what I hope, that we will do to answer history, do our part in a multilateral environment.
Maria Elsa Oliveira, that is from UNESCO Beijing Office. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us, World Insight, or check out our YouTube channel, follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei. On behalf of the team, thanks for watching. Bye for now.